Small spaces. 4. Ollie's alarm went off way too early the next day. She poked her blurry head out from under the covers, heard the rain rattling the roof, said "Nope," and pulled her head back in. Small spaces lay, bookmarked within arm's reach. Ollie had stayed up late reading. She wished she'd just read all night. After she finally went to sleep, she woke up twice from the same nightmare. Gray skies and burning grass, and trying frantically to run to someone she couldn't see, while an endless stream of giant people holding casseroles crowded around her, saying, "I'm so sorry, Olivia." It was still raining. Ollie's bedroom ceiling sloped down low over her bed. Sometimes when it poured, she would pretend she was lying in a jungle waterfall. But now Ollie kept herself tucked in her blankets. "Ollie!" her dad bellowed from the foot of the stairs. "Don't even think about that snooze button. Rain boots, extra sweater, brush your teeth, and get down here now. You're going to the farm, remember?" A large stuffed rabbit, eyeless and noseless, lay face to face with Ollie. She glared at it. "Today? Maybe I should hope for detention." The rain roared down, as though in agreement. Their whole class was going to Misty Valley Farm. No little downpour would stop Mr. Easton. He'd been talking it up for weeks. They were going to learn about milking cows and slaughtering hogs, cut the throat and then hang it up to drain, and growing broccoli, the yummiest flower. It was supposed to make them appreciate Vermont's agricultural history. Ollie looked out her skylight and was sure of only one thing: it would make them get wet. Very quietly, as though her father downstairs would hear, Ollie stuck an arm out from under her comforter, reached for small spaces, and pulled it under the blanket with her. The first part of the book was all about Beth's childhood with Caleb and Jonathan. There was a lot of haying and pie baking and lambing and fishing. Ollie had been delighted, but it didn't really explain why the woman by the creek was trying to throw the book away. But now Beth's tone had changed. "Dearest, I have told you a little of my youth. Forgive an old woman's rambling. I wish to set it all down so that I could live it again, and so that you could remember the good times you did not see. But now I must tell you the rest. Jonathan told me this part of the story himself. It may seem unbelievable. You may judge for yourself, but I believe him. Listen now, but do not condemn your father. He meant well. I have told you of our delightful childhood years after my father hired Caleb and Jonathan and Kathy and gave them a home at Smoke Hollow. The boys were my dearest friends, and Kathy was like a second mother. But when I was 17, my father died. Suddenly, I was no longer a child. I was a woman with a farm to manage. Overnight, it seemed that Caleb and Jonathan weren't just my childhood friends anymore. They began vying for my attention, and eventually to grow suspicious of each other. I am afraid I did little to prevent them. I was an heiress, you know, and they loved me. I rather like them fighting for my time. It was like knights errant. I thought I was young and foolish. Of course, I had always known which brother I wanted to marry. I had known since Jonathan smiled at me the day I met him. When Jonathan asked for my hand, I said yes. Caleb was furious when he found out. The two brothers quarreled. John wouldn't tell me all that they said, but I gather that some of the insults on both sides were unforgivable. The night they argued, there was a storm up. You remember how Smoke Hollow gets when it storms in October? There was ice on the rocks by Lethe Creek. Freezing rain poured down. The brothers, shouting, came to blows. Jonathan struck his brother. Caleb, weeping, ran outside alone. Jonathan, still angry, decided best to let Caleb go. He would get cold, Jonathan reasoned, and come back. But Caleb didn't come back. 1 day, 2 days, and Caleb didn't come back. Search parties were sent out. They found no trace of him. Their mother, Kathy, frantic, blamed Jonathan for Caleb's disappearance. Grief made her wild. One night she and Jonathan fought in turn. Kathy must have been half mad with sadness and shock by then. She told John to leave her house and not return until he had brought back his brother. Jonathan was eaten up with guilt. When his mother ordered him to go out, he went. It was raining, he told me later. Very softly, a rain like cold tears. A mist was rising with the rain, the mist that gives Smoke Hollow its name. It was nearly Samhain, which in the old country marked the turning of the year. I cannot excuse what he did next, but John was desperate, outside in the wet, grieving. "Please," Jonathan said aloud, "please, I'm sorry. I just want him back. I'll do anything, anything." And out of the mist a voice answered. "Are you reading?" Dad bellowed from below. Ollie popped her head out of the covers with a jerk. "Put it down. I want to hear footsteps. Clothes, boots, coat, now." And then he added in a coaxing sort of bellow, "I made bacon and oatmeal. I know you're hungry." She was. She had skipped both dinner and snacks the night before. The smell of bacon drifted deliciously up the stairs. What she really wanted was to eat bacon and oatmeal in bed and to finish Small Spaces. Putting a quiver in her voice, Ollie said, "I think I have a fever." She pressed an experimental hand to her forehead, definitely warm. "I shouldn't go out in the rain," she added. "I might catch pneumonia." Ollie heard her dad's footsteps. She managed to shove her book under the covers, huddled down into the blankets, and assume a pathetic expression a second before he walked in. Ollie's dad wore blue plaid. He looked as though he hadn't slept at all. He was rumpled, and a splotch of oatmeal was stuck to his shirt. His fingers fidgeted as though looking for something to do. At first he seemed worried. Then his look turned to exasperation. "Yep, you do look sick," her dad said. "Very sick. Nothing to do but to stay here with some tea and dry toast." He pounced on the book, which was just peeking out from under her blanket. Ollie winced. "No books, of course," he added. "Too much excitement might give you the flu." Ollie looked from her dad to the book. A day alone in bed with dry toast? At least she could read on the bus. She coughed once, bravely. "I am feeling a little better," she tried out of noble expression. "I don't want to get behind in school." "How brave of you," said her dad. Ollie got out of bed with dignity. "5 minutes," said her dad, bounding back down to the kitchen, from which drifted the smell of now burning bacon. Ollie looked up at her skylight. The rain slanted across the glass. It was like looking into an aquarium. Maybe Ollie thought they all really lived underwater, like mer people, just didn't know it. Because of them, water was just like air. No, that was silly. The cool air in her room was punishment after her warm covers. She shoved her feet into fuzzy slippers and stumbled, shivering, to her dresser. After some consideration, Ollie put on faded jeans, a long green sweater, and woolly socks her dad had knitted with a fish on one and a fisherman on the other. Her yellow rain boots were waiting for her downstairs by the back door. She reached under her pillow for a big black wristwatch with a cracked face and put this on carefully. She didn't bother to comb her hair. Combs just made her curls frizzy. Finally, she stepped back, scowled at her reflection, went to the bathroom, hastily brushed her teeth, shoved small spaces into her backpack, and padded down the stairs. Ollie didn't make a lot of noise in her socks, but when she stepped into the kitchen, her dad still turned around right away. In some ways, he hadn't changed much since last year. He told jokes and knitted socks just like he always had. But his thick dark hair had silver threads that hadn't been there before, and sometimes Ollie would catch him staring blankly into space when he thought she wasn't looking. "Look at your eyes, Dad," her mom had once said. "Look at your dad's eyes," her mom had once said, when all three of them were paddling down the Connecticut River. Ollie was sitting in the middle of the canoe, and her dad was behind her in the stern. From the bow, Ollie's mom looked back and smiled, her nose sunburned red. "Aren't your dad's eyes the loveliest in the whole world?" They were, big and velvety, so dark that you couldn't see where the colored part ended and the pupil began. "You have just the same eyes, Olivia, my heartbreaker." Ollie had smiled and her dad had laughed and said, "You've got my eyes, maybe, Ollie Pop, but you're as brave as your mother." Standing in the kitchen, Ollie shook the memory away. Her dad had gotten Bernie, the wood stove, going. The fire crackled and pinged behind the stove's glass door. The hallway and the stairs had been cold, but the kitchen was warm. A big pot of oatmeal steamed on the stove, and 3 nice, crackly brown loaves sat on the counter. Dad must have kept on baking after the garlic bread. Maybe he'd baked all night, waiting for Ollie to come down. Ollie decided not to think about that. She wasn't going to feel bad about that. Think about breakfast. Toast? Ollie decided on oatmeal. She got herself a bowl, crumbled bacon into the oatmeal, then dumped a lot of cream and maple syrup on top. Ollie had helped tap the trees for syrup herself the winter before. This was the last batch of syrup they had all made together. Mom and her tapping, and her dad keeping the big pot boiling for days on end. Don't think about that either. Ollie put her oatmeal on the kitchen island and went to pour herself some coffee. "You're too young for coffee," said her dad, not looking up. He was sitting at the kitchen table and scrolling through the news. "I'm not too young to go out in the rain and catch pneumonia," said Ollie, pouring herself a cup anyway and stirring in sugar. Her dad looked up. He wasn't eating his own oatmeal. "Take more oatmeal then," he said, catching sight of her bowl. "There are raisins and walnuts in the jars on the spice shelf. You must be starving. You didn't come down last night." He had waited up. Ollie definitely felt bad now. Guiltily, and also because she was really hungry, Ollie added some raisins and a pat of butter to her oatmeal and gave the whole mess a stir. "Ready for the farm today?" her dad said. "Just yesterday I was talking about Misty Valley with Mr. Brewster. Linda Webster's only been in business for 5 years, but she's really doing well for herself. The farm's revitalized the county. I'm a bit jealous you get to see it all firsthand. Think I could join the 6th grade and come along?" "Only if you've been practicing your drowned rat impressions," said Ollie with a dark look at the streaming window. She added warm milk to her coffee and brought her mug and her refreshed bowl of oatmeal back to the table. Her dad snorted and glanced at the rain sluicing down the windows. "There is that. Bring a hat. I'll have the stove going when you get back." "Hot chocolate?" Ollie suggested. "With marshmallows," said her dad, and smiled a smile that went all the way to the crinkles on either side of his eyes. It was a smile she didn't see very much anymore. Ollie almost smiled back. Maybe getting wet wouldn't be so bad. She took a big sip of her coffee and opened small spaces. She could feel her dad watching her over her book, but she didn't look. Looking would make her feel guilty all over again. Ollie forced her attention to her book. White mist crept up from the creek. Softly it slipped toward Jonathan, standing tear-stained in the rain. A man walked out of the smoky dark. "What did he look like?" I asked Jonathan later. "He smiled," Jonathan told me. "He didn't tell me his name. I don't think he has a name. He had long, thin fingers, and oh, I can't remember the rest. I felt as though I'd known him since the day I was born, and I felt the most indescribable horror at the sight of him." When the man spoke, his voice was gentle. "I think you called me," he said to Jonathan, while the rain streamed around them. "No," said Jonathan, "I called my brother." "Your brother is gone," said the man, "but I could bring him back for you." He smiled. "For a price." Jonathan's knees shook, but he still stammered. "What price?" "When I ask, you will come with me and do as I say," said the man. "If you do, you will have your brother back again." "For how long?" Jonathan asked. "How long would I have to do as you say?" The man's smile broadened. His eyes were dark as a river at midnight, until the mist turned to rain, he said. "Ollie! Ollie!" Ollie took a deep breath, blinking in the cozy firelit kitchen. She had thought it was dark as a rainy night on an old farm. Her dad looked from her to the book. "Were you not listening at all? I was giving you such a fantastic speech, too." "Speech?" said Ollie, still dazed. "Yep," said her dad. "The Be Good Today, Stay Dry, I Love You speech. It's in the manual somewhere." Ollie just blinked at him. Her dad sighed. "'Kay," he said. "How about this instead?" He thought for a minute. "What did the frog say about the book?" "Dunno," Ollie said distractedly, still thinking about small spaces. "Read it," said her dad, making frog noises. "Read it." Ollie groaned. "And then what did the chicken say?" asked her dad, looking pleased with himself. Ollie put her head in her hands. "Bawk, bawk, 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 bawk," said her dad, making clucking sounds. Ollie cracked a tiny smile. "Come on," her dad said, taking a last swig of coffee. "I'll drive you. Hurry." Ollie finished her own coffee, swiped her spoon through the last of her oatmeal, and followed her dad into the rain.